When maid Raina Cole steps into a forbidden bathroom to escape a storm, she never expects to meet Julian Marrow, heir to a powerful estate. One accidental encounter sets off a chain of choices that could cost them everything, or finally give them the belonging they both crave. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The massive iron gates of the Marrow estate loomed before Raina Cole as she hurried along the wet sidewalk. Rain poured down in sheets, soaking through her thin jacket and dampening her uniform underneath. She clutched her bag tighter, quickening her steps. At 25, she had learned that being late to work was a luxury she couldn't afford. Great, just great, she muttered, glancing down at her soaked clothes. This job at the Marrow estate was the most stable position she'd had in years. After bouncing between temp jobs since aging out of foster care, Raina had finally found something that paid her bills on time. The security guard nodded as she showed her ID card, barely looking up from his newspaper. Raina hurried up the long driveway, her shoes squelching with each step. The Marrow estate was one of New York's oldest private mansions, a sprawling property that required a full staff to maintain. As one of the newer maids, Raina was responsible for the East Wing, polishing chandeliers, dusting antiques, and making sure every surface gleamed. By the time she reached the service entrance, she was drenched from head to toe. Mrs. Porter, the head housekeeper, looked up from her clipboard as Raina entered the staff area. Her eyes widened at the sight of the young woman dripping water onto the freshly mopped floor. "Good heavens, child, you look like you swam here." Raina felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Porter. The bus was late, and then the rain just came out of nowhere. I can clean this up right away." Mrs. Porter shook her head, her stern face softening slightly. In the 6 months since Raina had started working at the estate, she had proven herself to be reliable and hard-working, never causing problems. "You can't possibly work in those wet clothes. You'll catch your death, and I can't afford to be short-staffed." Raina bit her lip, thinking quickly. "I have my spare uniform in my locker, but—" She hesitated, knowing her request might be stepping over a line. "Would it be possible for me to use one of the guest bathrooms to shower quickly? Just this once. I promise I'll be extra careful." Mrs. Porter checked her watch, considering. The owners were rarely in residence, and the East Wing guest rooms weren't scheduled for any visitors. "The third-floor bathroom in the East Wing. Be quick about it and make sure you leave everything spotless. The family isn't expected, so it should be fine." Relief washed over Raina's face. "Thank you so much, Mrs. Porter. I'll be fast, I promise." She hurried to her locker, grabbed her spare uniform and a small toiletry bag she kept for emergencies, and made her way up the service stairs to the East Wing. The hallways were quiet and empty, just as they usually were. The Marrow family spent most of their time traveling or at their other properties, leaving the estate in the care of the staff. The guest bathroom was larger than Raina's entire apartment. Marble floors, gold fixtures, and a shower big enough for 3 people. She carefully placed her things on the counter, making sure not to disturb anything. After checking twice that the door was locked, she peeled off her wet clothes and stepped into the shower. The hot water was a luxury she rarely indulged in at her own apartment, where the water heater was temperamental at best. She washed quickly, not wanting to abuse Mrs. Porter's kindness, but allowing herself a moment to enjoy the expensive soap and plush towels. 10 minutes later, she was feeling human again. Wrapped in one of the oversized towels, she stepped out of the shower and began drying her hair with another towel. She hummed softly to herself, a habit she'd developed over years of working alone. That's when she heard it, the unmistakable sound of the door handle turning. Raina froze, clutching the towel tighter around her body. The door was locked. Wasn't it? Panic rose in her throat as the door swung open. Standing in the doorway was a man she had only seen in photographs around the estate. Tall, with dark hair and startled blue eyes, dressed in an expensive suit that looked slightly rumpled from travel. Julian Marrow, the heir to the Marrow fortune, and the man who signed her paychecks. For a moment, neither of them moved. Raina felt her heart hammering against her ribs, mortification washing over her in waves. This was how she would lose her job. Standing half-naked in a bathroom she had no business using, caught by the owner himself. Julian stared at her, his expression unreadable. His eyes took in her wet hair, her bare shoulders, the towel clutched tightly around her body. But instead of anger, something else flickered across his face, something Raina couldn't identify. "I'm so sorry," she finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mrs. Porter gave me permission to use the shower because of the rain, but I should have. I'll go right now. I'm so sorry." She moved to gather her things, keeping the towel secured with one hand, expecting him to turn away or leave in disgust. Instead, he remained in the doorway, still looking at her with that strange expression. "You have nothing to apologize for," he said softly. His voice was deeper than she expected, with a gentleness that didn't match his imposing presence. "I was the one who wasn't supposed to be here." Raina blinked in confusion. "Sir, I arrived early. No one was expecting me until next week." He took a step back, finally seeming to realize the awkwardness of the situation. "Please, take your time. I should go." Before she could respond, he closed the door, leaving Raina standing there in shock, her heart still racing. She dressed in record time, her hands shaking slightly as she buttoned her uniform. After making absolutely sure the bathroom was immaculate, she slipped out and hurried down the service stairs, praying she wouldn't run into Julian Marrow again. Mrs. Porter was waiting for her in the staff room, a concerned look on her face. "There you are. Mr. Julian has arrived unexpectedly. Did you happen to see him?" Raina felt her face grow hot. "Yes, ma'am. We ran into each other." Mrs. Porter's eyes widened. "Oh, dear. Was he upset about you using the guest bathroom?" "No, he was very understanding." Raina couldn't meet the older woman's eyes. "He said he was early, that's all." Mrs. Porter nodded, clearly relieved. "Well, thank goodness for that. Mr. Julian has always been the kind one of the bunch, not like his father or that dreadful brother of his." She handed Raina a list of tasks. "He'll be staying in the main suite, so make sure it's perfect, and the east wing still needs attention." Raina nodded, grateful for the chance to lose herself in work and forget the humiliating encounter. "I'll get right on it." For the rest of the day, Raina worked methodically, moving from room to room with practiced efficiency. She polished silver until she could see her reflection, dusted every surface twice, and changed linens with hospital corners so sharp they could cut paper. Work had always been her refuge, the one place where she knew exactly what was expected of her. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't shake the memory of Julian Marrow's face when he'd opened that bathroom door. He hadn't looked angry or disgusted. He'd looked surprised, and something else, something that made her stomach flutter in a way that frightened her. As she was finishing the library, the sound of footsteps made her turn. Julian Marrow stood in the doorway, his suit jacket gone, his sleeves rolled up to his elbows. He looked younger this way, less intimidating. "I was hoping I'd find you," he said, stepping into the room. Raina immediately lowered her eyes, her grip tightening on the duster in her hand. "Is there something you need, Mr. Marrow?" He moved closer, his steps hesitant. "I wanted to apologize properly for earlier. I should have knocked." She risked a glance up at him, confused by his apology. In her experience, the wealthy rarely apologize to people like her. "There's no need, sir. It was my fault for using a guest bathroom." Julian shook his head. "Mrs. Porter told me about the storm and how drenched you were. You had every right to get dry." He paused, looking around the immaculate library. "I've been away too long. I'd forgotten how beautiful this place can be when someone cares for it properly." The compliment caught her off guard. "Thank you, sir. I just do my job." He smiled then, a small, genuine smile that transformed his serious face. "And you do it exceptionally well, Miss Cole," she supplied. "Raina Cole." "Miss Cole." He seemed to be testing her name. "How long have you worked here?" 6 months, sir." Julian nodded, moving to one of the bookshelves, running his fingers along the spines of the books. "And do you enjoy it? Working here?" The question was so unexpected that Raina answered honestly before she could think better of it. "Most days, it's quiet. I like bringing order to beautiful things." Something in her answer seemed to please him. He turned back to her, studying her face with an intensity that made her want to fidget. "Well, Miss Cole, I hope our awkward introduction won't make your work here uncomfortable. I plan to stay longer than usual this time." He hesitated, then added, "Perhaps we'll see more of each other." Before she could respond, he nodded politely and left the library, leaving Raina staring after him, the duster still clutched in her hand. That night, as she rode the bus back to her small apartment in Queens, Raina replayed the encounters in her mind. Twice in one day, she had spoken directly to Julian Marrow, something that would have been unthinkable yesterday. Most of the staff had never even met him, as he rarely visited the estate, and when he did, he kept to himself. Her tiny apartment was cold when she arrived, the ancient radiator making more noise than heat. She heated leftover soup on her hot plate and ate it standing by the window, watching the rain continue to fall over the city. "Get it together, Raina," she told herself firmly. He was just being polite. Tomorrow everything will be back to normal. But as she got ready for bed, setting her alarm for another early morning, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. The way Julian had looked at her in that bathroom doorway, like he was seeing something unexpected, something that surprised him. She remembered his exact words, "You have nothing to apologize for. I was the one who wasn't supposed to be here." It was the first time in her life that someone had made her feel like she belonged somewhere she clearly didn't. The next few days settled into an unusual pattern. Julian Marrow, instead of disappearing into his office or leaving for business meetings, seemed to be everywhere Raina went. She would be polishing the banister, and he would appear at the top of the stairs, asking casual questions about the history of the house. She would be arranging flowers in the dining room, and he would wander in, commenting on her choice of vase. At first, she thought it was coincidence. Then she wondered if he was checking up on her work, but there was nothing critical in his observations, nothing that suggested he was dissatisfied. If anything, he seemed genuinely interested in what she was doing. On Thursday, she was on a ladder in the library, carefully dusting the crystal chandelier when she felt the ladder wobble slightly. Looking down, she found Julian steadying it, a concerned expression on his face. "That doesn't look safe," he commented. "Shouldn't maintenance be handling this?" Raina carefully descended the ladder, conscious of his hand still holding it steady. "Mr. Erickson has been out sick this week. Mrs. Porter asked if I could manage it since I've done it before." Julian frowned. "You could get hurt." The concern in his voice sounded genuine, making Raina uncomfortable. She wasn't used to anyone worrying about her safety. "I'm careful," she assured him, folding up the ladder, "and it's part of my job." He helped her carry the ladder back to the supply closet, ignoring her protests that she could manage. "You know," he said as they walked, "I've been coming to this house my entire life, but I think this is the first time I've actually seen how much work goes into maintaining it." Raina glanced at him, surprised by the admission. "Most people don't notice. That's kind of the point of good service, to be invisible." Julian stopped walking, turning to face her. "Is that what you want, to be invisible?" The question hit too close to something raw within her. Being invisible had been her survival strategy for as long as she could remember. In foster care, in school, in every job she'd ever had. Don't draw attention, don't make waves, don't let them see you. "It's safer that way," she said finally, not meeting his eyes. For a moment, Julian was silent. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter. "I think that's a shame. You shouldn't have to disappear." Before she could respond, Mrs. Porter rounded the corner, stopping short at the sight of Julian Marrow helping a maid with a ladder. "Mr. Julian, is everything all right?" Julian smiled easily at the housekeeper. "Perfectly fine, Mrs. Porter. I was just helping Miss Cole with this ladder. By the way, we should hire someone to cover for Erickson when he's ill. I don't like the idea of the cleaning staff handling maintenance tasks." Mrs. Porter blinked in surprise. "Of course, sir. I'll make arrangements right away." With a final nod to Raina, Julian continued down the hallway, leaving her to face Mrs. Porter's curious stare. "Is there something I should know about, Raina?" the older woman asked carefully. Raina shook her head quickly. "No, ma'am. Mr. Marrow was just passing by when I was on the ladder. He was concerned about safety, that's all." Mrs. Porter didn't look entirely convinced, but she nodded. "Well, be careful. The Marrows aren't like us, dear. They live in a different world." As if Raina needed the reminder. On Friday afternoon, disaster struck. Raina was vacuuming one of the guest bedrooms when the ancient machine made a terrible grinding noise and then died completely. She tried the power button several times, checked the plug and even looked for a reset button, but the vacuum remained stubbornly silent. Panic began to rise in her chest. The vacuum was estate property, but she had been the one using it. What if they made her pay for repairs? Or worse, for a replacement? She could barely make rent as it was. She dragged the vacuum to the nearby supply closet, hoping to find tools or something that might help her fix it before anyone noticed. Tears of frustration stung her eyes as she struggled with the screws on the back panel. One slipped, cutting her finger. "Damn it," she whispered, sucking on the small cut. The tears came faster now, a combination of fear, frustration, and exhaustion. She sat on the floor of the closet, the broken vacuum beside her, and tried to calm her breathing. The door to the supply closet opened suddenly, flooding the small space with light. Julian Marrow stood there, his expression changing from surprise to concern when he saw her tears. "Raina, what's wrong? Are you hurt?" She quickly wiped at her eyes, mortified to be caught crying over a vacuum cleaner. "It's nothing, sir. The vacuum broke and I was trying to fix it. I'm sorry for the disruption." Instead of leaving or calling for maintenance, Julian stepped into the closet and closed the door partway, kneeling down beside her. He took her hand gently, examining the small cut on her finger. "You're bleeding." Raina pulled her hand back, embarrassed. "It's just a scratch, I'll be fine." Julian looked at the vacuum, then back at her tear-stained face. Understanding dawned in his eyes. "You're worried about being blamed for this." She couldn't deny it, so she said nothing. He reached for the vacuum, turning it over to examine the bottom. "This thing is ancient. It should have been replaced years ago." He looked up at her, his blue eyes serious. "Let me help, please. Not because I pity you, because I see you." The simple statement hit Raina like a physical blow. She had spent her entire life trying not to be seen, and yet here was this man, this wealthy, powerful man, claiming to see her anyway. "Why?" she asked, the word escaping before she could stop it. Julian seemed to consider the question carefully. "Because in a house full of people who work for my family, you're the only one who treats this place like it matters. Not because it's valuable, but because it's worth caring for." He smiled slightly. "And maybe because you're the first person who's looked at me like I'm just a man who walked into the wrong bathroom, not a marrow." He stood up, offering her his hand. After a moment's hesitation, Raina took it, allowing him to help her to her feet. "Come on," he said. "Let's find a first aid kit for your finger, and then I'll call about getting a new vacuum, one that won't eat your hands when it breaks down." As she followed him out of the supply closet, Raina felt something shift inside her. A wall beginning to crumble, a door beginning to open. For the first time since she'd started working at the Marrow estate, she felt visible, seen, and it terrified her. The weekend passed quietly. Julian had meetings in the city, and Raina caught up on laundry and grocery shopping in her apartment. By Monday morning, she had convinced herself that whatever strange connection she'd felt with Julian Marrow had been a product of her imagination, fueled by exhaustion and the stress of the broken vacuum. But when she arrived at work, Mrs. Porter handed her an envelope with her name written on it in elegant handwriting. "Mr. Julian left this for you before he went out," the housekeeper said, watching Raina curiously. "He was very specific that I give it directly to you." Raina stared at the envelope, her heart beating faster. "Thank you, Mrs. Porter." She waited until her break to open it, sitting alone in the staff room. Inside was a simple note card with the Marrow family crest embossed at the top. "Miss Cole, I've arranged for new cleaning equipment to be delivered today. Please let Mrs. Porter know if anything isn't to your liking. Also, I've left a book in the library that I thought you might enjoy. It's on the small table by the window, your favorite spot, I've noticed." Julian Raina read the note 3 times, trying to make sense of it. He had noticed her favorite spot in the library. The small reading nook by the bay window was indeed where she often took her breaks, enjoying a few minutes of sunshine and quiet before returning to work. But she had never imagined that Julian Marrow had been paying such close attention. Later that day, she found the book, a collection of poetry by Langston Hughes. A simple bookmark was placed at Dreams, one of her favorite poems. She had been reading a worn library copy of Hughes's work just last week, during her lunch break. He really had been watching her. The realization should have made her uncomfortable. Instead, it made her feel something she couldn't quite name, a warm, unfamiliar feeling that settled in her chest and refused to leave. That evening, as she was finishing her shift, Julian returned to the estate. She was coming down the main staircase when he entered through the front door, looking tired from his day in the city. Their eyes met across the foyer, and for a moment, neither of them moved. Then Julian smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes and transformed his face. "Hello, Raina," he said softly. And despite every instinct telling her to keep her distance, to remain professional, to stay invisible, Raina smiled back. "Hello, Julian." 2 weeks passed, and Julian Marrow showed no signs of leaving the estate. The staff was buzzing with speculation. In the 6 years since he had inherited his portion of the family fortune, he had never stayed at the New York property for more than a few days at a time. "Maybe he's hiding from someone," whispered Donna, one of the kitchen staff, as they ate lunch in the staff room. "A scorned lover or something juicy like that." "I heard he's had a falling out with his father," offered Louise the gardener. "Old man Marrow wants him to take over the family business, but Julian's always been the rebel." Raina kept her head down, focusing on her sandwich. She hadn't told anyone about the book Julian had given her, or about their increasingly frequent conversations. It felt private, special somehow, and she wasn't ready to share it with the rest of the staff. Every night, she read a few pages of the poetry book before bed, wondering how Julian had known she would like it. Had he really been paying that much attention to her reading habits? The thought both thrilled and unnerved her. Their encounters had fallen into a strange pattern. Julian would find reasons to be wherever Raina was working, asking questions about the house, sharing stories about his travels, sometimes just watching her in comfortable silence. At first, she had been stiff and formal, addressing him as Mr. Marrow and keeping her eyes lowered. But gradually his easy manner had worn down her defenses. Now she found herself looking forward to seeing him, wondering what stories he might share, what questions he might ask. It was dangerous territory, she knew. Mrs. Porter's warning echoed in her mind. The Marrows aren't like us, dear. They live in a different world. But Julian didn't seem to care about those invisible boundaries. When he spoke to her, he looked directly into her eyes, as if he was speaking to an equal. And sometimes when she forgot herself and spoke freely about a book she had read or a thought she had, he would listen with such focus that it made her feel like her words actually mattered. On a warm Tuesday evening, Raina was in the kitchen garden picking fresh herbs for the chef. The sun was beginning to set, casting a golden glow over the carefully tended plants. She had finished her regular duties for the day, but had offered to help with the herb gathering when she overheard the chef complaining about needing fresh basil. "I didn't expect to find you out here." Julian's voice startled her. She turned to find him leaning against the garden gate, his usual suit replaced by casual slacks and a simple button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up. He looked younger this way, more approachable. "Chef Pierre needed herbs for dinner," she explained, holding up her small basket. "I don't mind, it's peaceful out here." Julian pushed away from the gate and came to stand beside her, looking down at the neat rows of herbs. "I used to hide out here as a kid, whenever my parents were hosting parties. The adults never thought to look for me in the kitchen garden." Raina smiled at the image of a young Julian hiding among the herbs. "Were you a troublemaker?" He laughed, a rich sound that made something warm unfurl in her chest. "Not really, just quiet. I preferred books to people. Still do, most of the time." He glanced at her. "Present company accepted, of course." Raina felt a blush creep up her neck. To hide it, she bent down to snip some more basil. "Did you grow up here, in this house?" Julian shook his head. "Not full-time. My parents preferred the Hamptons property during the summer and the apartment in the city during the school year. This place was mainly for holidays and special occasions." His expression turned wistful. "But it was always my favorite. It felt less formal somehow, like it had a soul." Raina understood exactly what he meant. Despite its grandeur, the Marrow estate had a warmth to it that was lacking in many of the other mansions she had worked in over the years. "It does have a soul," she agreed softly. "You can feel it in the way the light changes in different rooms, or how the wood creaks in certain spots." Julian looked at her with an expression of pleased surprise. "Exactly. That's exactly it." He hesitated, then asked, "Would you like to have tea with me in the garden room? The sunset view is spectacular this time of year." The invitation caught her off guard. Having tea with the owner of the house was definitely crossing a line, one that Mrs. Porter would not approve of, but the hopeful look in Julian's eyes made it impossible to refuse. "I should deliver these herbs to Chef Pierre first," she said. Julian grinned. "Of course. I'll meet you in the garden room in 15 minutes. Raina nodded, trying to ignore the butterflies in her stomach. 15 minutes, After delivering the herbs to a grateful Chef Pierre, Raina quickly freshened up in the staff bathroom. She untied her hair from its practical bun, letting the dark curls fall around her shoulders. There wasn't much she could do about her uniform, but at least she could look presentable. The garden room was at the back of the house, with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the formal gardens. As Julian had predicted, the sunset view was breathtaking, the sky painted in shades of pink and gold, casting a magical light over the carefully manicured landscape. Julian was already there, setting out a tea service on the small table by the windows. He looked up when she entered, his eyes widening slightly at the sight of her with her hair down. "You look different," he said. "Beautiful." Raina felt her cheeks warm at the compliment. "Thank you, I don't usually wear my hair down at work, it gets in the way." Julian gestured for her to sit in one of the comfortable chairs by the table. "Well, you're not working now. You're having tea with a friend." Friend, the word hung in the air between them. Was that what they were? Friends? It seemed both too simple and too complicated for whatever was developing between them. Julian poured the tea himself, rather than calling for one of the staff. He handed her a delicate china cup, their fingers brushing briefly in the exchange. "I've been meaning to ask you," he said, settling back in his chair. "How did you come to work here? Mrs. Porter mentioned you've only been with us for 6 months. Raina cradled the warm cup in her hands, considering how much to share. I've had a lot of jobs over the years, mostly temporary positions, hotels, private homes, corporate offices, wherever needed cleaning staff. She took a sip of the tea, surprised by its complex flavor. This position was the first stable one I found. Mrs. Porter took a chance on me, even though I didn't have a formal reference. Julian studied her over the rim of his cup. And before that, where's home for you? The question was innocent enough, but it touched on parts of her life that Raina rarely discussed. Still, something about the quiet evening and Julian's genuine interest made her want to share. I don't really have a home, she admitted. Not in the traditional sense. I grew up in foster care, aged out of the system at 18, and I've been on my own ever since. She expected to see pity in his eyes, the usual response when she shared this part of her story. Instead, there was something like recognition. So you never really belonged anywhere, he said softly. You were always just passing through. Raina nodded, surprised by his insight. Exactly. You learn not to get too attached, to places or to people. Julian set down his cup, his expression thoughtful. I understand that better than you might think. Growing up, we moved between properties based on the season or my father's business needs. I went to boarding schools, summer camps, always the new kid, always the outsider. He smiled ruefully. Even in my own family, I'm the odd one out. My father and brother are cut from the same cloth, ambitious, ruthless when necessary. I've never had that killer instinct. Is that why you don't work in the family business? Raina asked, remembering the staff gossip. Julian nodded. I manage my own investments, mostly in sustainable technology and the arts. It drives my father crazy. He thinks I'm wasting my potential. He laughed without humor. As if making more money for people who already have too much is the only worthy purpose in life. Raina had never heard him speak so openly before. It was clear that family was a painful subject for him. Is that why you're staying here longer? To avoid your family? Julian looked out at the darkening garden, his profile outlined against the last glow of sunset. Partly. My father's been pressuring me to take a more active role in Marrow Enterprises. My brother David is the CEO, but there's a board position opening up, and my father insists I'm the right person for it. And you don't want it? He turned back to her, his eyes troubled. I don't believe in what they're doing. Marrow Enterprises has been cutting corners on environmental regulations, exploiting tax loopholes, treating employees like disposable assets. I can't be part of that. He ran a hand through his hair. But that's not the only reason I've stayed. His gaze met hers, intense and unguarded. I've stayed because for the first time in years, I found someone I actually want to talk to. Someone who sees the soul in an old house and understands what it means to always be passing through. Raina's heart hammered in her chest. This was dangerous territory, far more dangerous than using a guest bathroom or having tea after hours. Julian was looking at her like she was something precious, something important. No one had ever looked at her that way before. Julian, she began, not even sure what she wanted to say. This is complicated. You're my employer. We come from completely different worlds. He leaned forward, his face earnest. Do we? Or do we both know what it's like to be alone even in a crowded room, to feel like an outsider in the places we're supposed to call home? Before she could answer, the door to the garden room opened. Mrs. Porter stood there, her expression shifting from surprise to concern as she took in the scene. Julian and Raina having tea together, sitting close, clearly engaged in an intimate conversation. Excuse me, Mr. Julian, the housekeeper said stiffly. I wasn't aware you had requested tea service this evening. Julian straightened, his face smoothly transitioning to polite neutrality. I didn't, Mrs. Porter. I took the liberty of arranging it myself. Miss Cole was kind enough to join me after completing her duties. Mrs. Porter's eyes moved to Raina, who felt herself shrinking under the older woman's disapproving gaze. I see. Well, Raina, if you've finished your tea, there are some linens that need to be inventoried before tomorrow. It was a clear dismissal, and Raina knew better than to argue. She stood quickly, setting down her half-empty cup. Of course, Mrs. Porter, I'll get right on that. She couldn't look at Julian as she left, afraid of what she might see in his eyes, or worse, what he might see in hers. The next morning, Mrs. Porter called Raina into her office before the start of the workday. The housekeeper looked at her steadily. Then you walk away with dignity, Raina. Find another position, start fresh somewhere new, but don't throw away your self-respect for a man who hasn't been honest with you. The advice stung, but Raina knew it came from a place of concern. Thank you, Mrs. Porter. I need some time to think. Of course, take the rest of the day off if you need to. The West Wing can wait until tomorrow. Raina nodded gratefully and left the office, her mind a whirlwind of confusion and hurt. As she walked toward the staff exit, she heard rapid footsteps behind her. "Raina, wait, please," Julian's voice. She stiffened but didn't stop walking. "Raina, please, let me explain." He caught up to her, moving to block her path. His face was desperate, his eyes pleading. "What Sophia said, it's not what you think." Raina finally looked at him, her eyes still red from crying. "You have a fiancé, Julian. A fiancé you never mentioned." He ran a hand through his hair, his frustration evident. We're not." He took a deep breath. "The engagement was arranged by our families. I never proposed to her, never gave her a ring. It was announced in the society pages before I even agreed to it." "But you didn't deny it," Raina pointed out, her voice steady despite the pain in her chest. "You let everyone believe it was real, because it was easier than fighting my father on yet another front." Julian's eyes were anguished. "But I ended it, Raina. 3 weeks ago, right before I came here. That's why I've been staying so long. I needed space from my family, from their expectations." Raina wanted to believe him. God, how she wanted to believe him. But Sophia's words echoed in her mind. "Don't mistake his curiosity for something deeper." "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked quietly. Julian looked ashamed. "Because I was afraid you'd see me differently. That you'd think I was like my father, like my brother, treating relationships as business transactions." He reached for her hand, but she pulled away. "Raina, please. What I feel for you is real. More real than anything I've ever felt." She shook her head, stepping back. "I need time, Julian. Time to think. This is a lot." For a moment he looked like he might argue, but then he nodded, respecting her wishes. "I understand. Take all the time you need. But Raina," his voice softened, "I'm not giving up on us. Not unless you tell me to." With that, he stepped aside, allowing her to pass. Raina walked out of the Marrow estate, tears blurring her vision once more. She had no idea what to do, what to believe. All she knew was that her heart, which had just begun to open, was now in serious danger of breaking. Housekeeper's expression was grave as she gestured for Raina to close the door. "Raina, I've always considered myself a fair supervisor," she began, folding her hands on her desk. "I hired you despite your lack of formal references because I saw potential in you, and you haven't disappointed me. Until now." Raina's stomach dropped. "Mrs. Porter, I can explain about yesterday." The older woman held up a hand. "There's nothing to explain. You were having tea with Mr. Julian, alone, after hours." She sighed heavily. "I warned you, didn't I? The Marrows aren't like us. They live in a different world." "It wasn't what it looked like," Raina insisted, though she wasn't entirely sure that was true. "We were just talking." Mrs. Porter gave her a knowing look. "Raina, I've been working for the Marrow family for 30 years. I've seen how they operate. The men in that family have a history of taking an interest in the female staff. It never ends well for the woman involved." Raina felt her cheeks flush with both embarrassment and indignation. "Julian isn't like that. He's different." "Oh, child." Mrs. Porter's voice softened with genuine concern. "That's what they all say. And maybe Mr. Julian is different in some ways. He's always been kinder than his father or brother. But at the end of the day, he's still a Marrow, and Marrows don't marry the help." The word marry made Raina's breath catch. No one had said anything about marriage. They were just, whatever they were, friends? Something more? She wasn't even sure herself. "I'm not going to fire you," Mrs. Porter continued. "You're a good worker, and we're short-staffed as it is. But I'm reassigning you to the West Wing. Mr. Julian rarely goes there, so you should be able to avoid any further encounters." Raina wanted to protest, to defend whatever was happening between her and Julian, but she needed this job. She couldn't afford to lose it over feelings that might lead nowhere. "I understand, Mrs. Porter. Thank you for not firing me." The housekeeper nodded, satisfied. "You're a smart girl, Raina. Don't throw away your position here for a few pretty words from a rich man. They always go back to their own kind in the end." As Raina left the office with her new assignment sheet, she tried to convince herself that Mrs. Porter was right. Whatever connection she felt with Julian was probably one-sided, or at least exaggerated in her mind. He was just being kind, maybe a little lonely. It didn't mean anything, but her heart knew better. For the next 3 days, Raina successfully avoided Julian by sticking to the West Wing as instructed. She worked longer hours, taking on extra tasks to keep herself busy and her mind off the conversations they'd shared. At night, she still read from the poetry book he'd given her, running her fingers over the pages and wondering if he had read the same words, felt the same emotions. On the fourth day, her strategy failed. She was changing the sheets in one of the guest bedrooms when the door opened and Julian walked in. He stopped short when he saw her, surprise giving way to a smile that made her heart skip. "There you are," he said, closing the door behind him. "I've been looking all over for you. I thought maybe you'd quit." Raina focused on tucking in the sheet corners, not meeting his eyes. "No, sir, just reassigned to the West Wing." Julian was quiet for a moment, absorbing this information. "Because of our tea in the garden room." It wasn't a question, but Raina nodded anyway. "Mrs. Porter felt it was inappropriate." Julian moved closer, his frustration evident. "That's ridiculous. We were just talking." Raina finally looked up at him, trying to keep her expression neutral. "Were we, Julian? Just talking?" The question hung in the air between them. Julian's eyes searched her face, his own expression open and vulnerable, in a way that made her chest ache. "No," he admitted softly. "It was more than that, at least for me." The confession, simple as it was, changed everything. Raina's carefully constructed walls began to crumble as Julian crossed the room to stand in front of her. "I know this is complicated," he said, his voice low and earnest. "I know there are 1,000 reasons why this is a bad idea, but Raina," he reached out, hesitantly taking her hand in his, "I can't stop thinking about you, about your smile, your mind, the way you see beauty in things most people overlook." Raina looked down at their joined hands, his pale against her brown skin, his smooth from a life of privilege, hers slightly rough from years of manual work. They were from different worlds, just as Mrs. Porter had said. But when he touched her, those worlds didn't seem so far apart. "Julian, I could lose my job," she whispered. "This job is all I have. I can't risk it." His expression grew serious. "You won't lose your job. I won't let that happen." He squeezed her hand gently. "But I also can't pretend I don't feel something for you. Something real." Against her better judgment, Raina found herself asking, "What do you feel?" Julian's smile was soft, tender, in a way that made her breath catch. "I feel like I've been sleepwalking through my life until now. Like I've been surrounded by people who only see the Marrow name, the money, the privilege. And then there's you, who looks at me and just sees Julian." He brought her hand to his lips, placing a gentle kiss on her knuckles. "Do you know how rare that is? How precious?" Raina felt tears stinging her eyes. She had spent her life being overlooked, being invisible. And now this man, this wealthy, beautiful man who could have anyone, was looking at her like she was the most valuable thing in the world. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Not just of losing my job. I'm scared of feeling this way about you, about anyone." She took a shaky breath. "When you grow up in the system, you learn early that people leave, that nothing lasts. I don't know if I can trust this." Julian stepped closer, his free hand coming up to gently cup her cheek. "Then we'll take it slow, day by day. No pressure, no expectations. Just two people getting to know each other." His thumb brushed away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "Will you give us that chance, Raina? Just a chance?" Looking into his eyes so full of hope and tenderness, Raina found herself nodding. "Okay, a chance." The smile that broke across Julian's face was like sunrise, warm and full of promise. For a breathtaking moment, she thought he might kiss her. Instead, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to her forehead, a gesture so gentle and respectful that it brought fresh tears to her eyes. "Thank you," he whispered against her skin. When he pulled back, his expression was determined. "We'll need to be careful, discreet, at least until we figure out what this is." Raina nodded, reality reasserting itself. "Mrs. Porter will be checking on me soon. You should go." Julian reluctantly stepped back but kept hold of her hand for a moment longer. "Meet me in the library tonight, after your shift. I'll make sure no one sees you." It was reckless, foolish even, but Raina found herself agreeing anyway. "Okay." The library. 9 o'clock. With one last squeeze of her hand, Julian left the room, glancing back at her with a smile that warmed her from the inside out. As she finished making the bed, Raina tried to make sense of what had just happened. Julian Marrow had feelings for her, real feelings, and despite every warning bell going off in her head, she knew she felt the same for him. Whatever happened next, there was no going back. That night, after most of the staff had gone home, Raina slipped into the library through the service entrance. The large room was dimly lit, with only a few lamps casting a warm glow over the bookshelves. Julian was waiting by the fireplace, where a small fire crackled softly. He had changed into casual clothes, jeans and a soft-looking sweater that made him appear younger, more approachable. When he saw her, His face lit up in a way that made her heart flutter. "You came," he said, as if he had been afraid she might change her mind. "I came," she confirmed, still standing awkwardly near the door. She had changed too, into the only nice outfit she owned, a simple blue dress she usually saved for special occasions. Julian crossed the room to her, taking in her appearance with appreciative eyes. "You look beautiful." Raina smoothed her hands over the fabric of her dress, suddenly self-conscious. "It's not much, but—" "It's perfect," he insisted, taking her hand and leading her to the sitting area by the fire. "I brought some hot chocolate and cookies from that bakery you mentioned liking in Queens." She blinked in surprise. "You remembered that?" Julian smiled as he handed her a mug of hot chocolate. "I remember everything you tell me, Raina." They sat together on the plush sofa, close but not touching, both aware of the newness of this shift in their relationship. For a while they just talked about books they loved, places they'd been, dreams they'd had as children. Julian told her about his time in boarding school, where he'd felt like an outsider despite his family name. Raina shared stories of her favorite foster home, where the mother had taught her to bake bread from scratch. As the night wore on, they gradually moved closer to each other, until Julian's arm was around her shoulders and her head was resting against his chest. It felt right being there with him, like finding a piece of herself she hadn't known was missing. "Tell me something you've never told anyone," Julian murmured, his breath warm against her hair. Raina thought for a moment, then said, "When I was 12, I used to sneak into the public library after it closed. The night janitor knew me. He was a kind old man who felt sorry for the foster kid who read instead of playing with other kids. He'd let me in the back door, and I'd sit in the reading room for hours surrounded by books pretending I lived there." Julian's arm tightened around her. "What were you reading?" "Fantasy novels mostly. Stories about ordinary children who discovered they were special, chosen for some great adventure." She smiled at the memory. "I kept waiting for someone to tell me I was secretly a princess or a wizard." "You are special," Julian said softly. "Maybe not a princess, but definitely magical in your own way." Raina looked up at him, touched by the sincerity in his voice. "Your turn. Tell me something you've never told anyone." Julian was quiet for a long moment. "I almost ran away once. I was 16, had just finished my first year at Princeton. My father was pressuring me to switch from liberal arts to business, threatening to cut me off if I didn't. I packed a bag, emptied my trust fund, the small one I had access to, and got as far as the train station." He sighed, "But I couldn't do it. I was too afraid of disappointing everyone." "So what did you do?" "I went back, changed my major to business like he wanted, and I was miserable for the next 2 years until I finally found the courage to switch back to what I loved, literature and philosophy. It caused a huge rift with my father that we've never really healed." Raina reached for his hand, lacing her fingers with his. "That must have been hard standing up to him like that." Julian nodded. "It was, but it taught me something important, that living someone else's idea of your life is no life at all." He looked down at their joined hands. "I think that's why this, whatever is happening between us, feels so right. For once I'm not doing what's expected of me. I'm following my heart." The words hung in the air between them, full of promise and possibility. Raina felt herself drawn to him, like a planet caught in orbit around a sun. When Julian lowered his head, his lips hovering just above hers, she closed the distance between them. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, a question rather than a demand. But when Raina responded, sliding her hands up to his shoulders, Julian deepened the kiss, pulling her closer against him. She could feel his heart racing, matching the tempo of her own. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Julian rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since I saw you in that bathroom, wrapped in a towel, looking surprised and beautiful." Raina laughed softly, a hint of her old insecurity surfacing. "I thought you were going to fire me on the spot." Julian smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Fire you?" "I was trying to remember how to speak. All I could think was that you looked like you belonged there more than anyone ever had." The words echoed in Raina's mind, awakening a longing she had buried deep inside, the desire to belong somewhere, to someone. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine what it would be like to truly belong in Julian's world, to walk through the Marrow estate, not as a maid, but as his, what, girlfriend? Partner? The label seemed inadequate for what was growing between them. As if reading her thoughts, Julian said, "I know we're taking this slow, but I want you to know, Raina, this isn't casual for me. You aren't casual for me." The intensity in his eyes both thrilled and frightened her. "Julian, We've only known each other for a few weeks. And yet I feel like I've been waiting for you my whole life." He smiled at her startled expression. "Too much. Maybe a little," she admitted, though secretly, his words echoed her own feelings. Julian laughed, pulling her back against his chest. "Fair enough. We'll take it day by day like we agreed." They stayed like that for another hour, talking softly, sharing small kisses, learning the contours of this new relationship. When the grandfather clock in the corner chimed midnight, Raina reluctantly pulled away. "I should go. I have an early shift tomorrow." Julian nodded, though he looked as reluctant as she felt. "I'll walk you out." "No," she said quickly. "We can't risk someone seeing us together. I'll use the service stairs." Julian sighed, but didn't argue. "When can I see you again? Like this, I mean." Raina thought about her schedule. "I have Thursday evening off." "Thursday, then. I'll make dinner for you, here in the library." The idea of Julian Marrow cooking for her was so unexpected that Raina couldn't help but laugh. "You cook?" He looked mildly offended. "I'll have you know I make an excellent pasta. And I can open a bottle of wine without assistance." "Impressive skills for a millionaire," she teased. Julian grinned, pulling her in for one last kiss. "Only the best for you, Raina Cole." As she made her way back to her apartment that night, Raina felt like she was floating. The rational part of her brain warned that this couldn't last, that Julian would eventually return to his world of wealth and privilege, leaving her behind. But for now, for tonight, she allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, they could create a world of their own. The next morning, Raina was humming as she dusted the antiques in the West Wing drawing room. Even Mrs. Porter's suspicious glances couldn't dampen her mood. She and Julian had exchanged text messages before she'd fallen asleep, and the first thing she'd seen upon waking was a good morning text from him. She was so lost in her happy thoughts that she didn't notice the new arrival until a sharp voice cut through her reverie. "So this is what $1 million view looks like these days. I have to say I'm underwhelmed." Raina turned to find a striking woman standing in the doorway, tall and elegant, with sleek blonde hair and a designer outfit that probably cost more than Raina made in 3 months. She was beautiful in a cold, perfect way, like a statue carved from ice. "Excuse me?" Raina said, unsure if the woman was speaking to her. The stranger entered the room, her high heels clicking on the hardwood floor. "You're the maid Julian's been so fascinated with, aren't you? The one who's been keeping him here all this time?" Raina felt her stomach drop. "I don't know what you're talking about. If you're looking for Mr. Marrow, I believe he's in his office." The woman laughed, a brittle sound with no warmth. "Oh, honey, let's not play games. I'm Sophia Huntington, Julian's fiancée. Or I was, until he suddenly decided he needed space 3 weeks ago." Fiancée. The word hit Raina like a physical blow. Julian had never mentioned being engaged, never even hinted at it. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," Raina managed, though her voice sounded distant to her own ears. "Mr. Marrow and I have a professional relationship. I work here." Sophia's perfectly manicured hand waved dismissively. "Save it. The staff talks, you know. Everyone's seen how he looks at you." Her eyes raked over Raina, taking in her simple uniform, her plain appearance. "Though for the life of me, I can't see the appeal. Must be some kind of Florence Nightingale complex. The wealthy man rescued by the common girl's simple charms." Raina gripped her dusting cloth tightly, struggling to maintain her composure. "If you'll excuse me, I have work to finish." She tried to move past Sophia, but the other woman blocked her path. Her word of advice from someone who knows Julian much better than you ever will: don't mistake his curiosity for something deeper. The Marrows have been collecting pretty things for generations. Art, property, people. You're just the latest acquisition. He'll tire of you just like he tires of everything else. Before Raina could respond, another voice joined the conversation, cold and hard with barely controlled anger. "That's enough, Sophia." Julian stood in the doorway, his expression thunderous. Sophia turned to him, her icy demeanor melting into a practiced smile. "Julian, darling, I was just getting acquainted with your staff." Julian's jaw tightened. "Raina, would you excuse us, please? I need to speak with Miss Huntington privately." Raina nodded, not trusting herself to speak. As she passed Julian, their eyes met briefly. She saw regret there and something like pleading, but all she could think was, fiancé. He had a fiancé, and he had never told her. She fled down the hallway, tears burning behind her eyes. Behind her, she could hear Julian's angry voice, though she couldn't make out the words. It didn't matter. The damage was done. Fiancé. The word echoed in her mind, mocking her foolishness. Mrs. Porter had been right all along. The Marrows weren't like her. They lived in a different world, A world where men like Julian had fiancées from their own social circle, while indulging in flirtations with the help. By the time Raina reached the staff bathroom, the tears were flowing freely. She locked herself in a stall, trying to muffle her sobs with her hand. How could she have been so naive, so utterly, completely stupid? She thought of their kiss by the fireplace, the way Julian had looked at her, the promises in his eyes. Had it all been a lie? A game to alleviate his boredom? A soft knock on the bathroom door made her freeze. "Raina." It was Mrs. Porter's voice, uncharacteristically gentle. "Are you in there, dear?" Raina wiped at her tears, trying to compose herself. "Yes, Mrs. Porter, I'll be out in a minute." "Take your time," the housekeeper said, "and when you're ready, come to my office. We need to talk." 20 minutes later, after splashing cold water on her face and taking several deep breaths, Raina made her way to Mrs. Porter's office. The older woman was waiting, a cup of tea already prepared. "Sit down," she said, pushing the tea toward Raina. "You look like you could use this." Raina sat, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. "Thank you." Mrs. Porter studied her with knowing eyes. "I take it you've met Ms. Huntington?" Raina nodded, unable to speak around the lump in her throat. The housekeeper sighed. "I was afraid this might happen. I should have warned you more specifically about Mr. Julian's situation." She took a sip of her own tea. "The engagement is more of a business arrangement than a love match. The Huntingtons and the Marrows have been trying to merge their families for generations. Sophia is the perfect society bride, wealthy, well-connected, appropriate." "Why are you telling me this?" Raina asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mrs." Porter's expression softened with genuine sympathy. "Because despite my warnings, I can see that you've developed feelings for Mr. Julian, and God help you, I think he has feelings for you too." She set down her cup with a decisive click. "But feelings don't change reality, Raina. And the reality is that men like Julian Marrow don't marry women like us, no matter how much they might want to." Raina felt fresh tears threatening. "He never told me about her, because he wanted to pretend for a little while that he was free to follow his heart." Mrs. Porter reached across the desk to pat Raina's hand. "I'm not saying he was right to mislead you, but I understand why he did it." Raina looked down at her tea, watching the liquid tremble as her hands shook slightly. "What should I do?" Mrs. Porter was quiet for a moment, considering. "That depends on what you want, dear. If you want to keep your job, I suggest maintaining a professional distance from Mr. Julian from now on. I can arrange for you to work exclusively in the West Wing, possibly even switch your hours so you're here when he's typically out. And if I don't want to keep my job?" The question surprised Raina even as she asked it. Raina didn't go to work the next day. She called Mrs. Porter and asked for a personal day, which the housekeeper granted without question. Instead of her usual routine, Raina spent the morning sitting by her apartment window, staring out at the grey New York sky, trying to make sense of her feelings. Julian had texted her several times since their confrontation, but she hadn't responded. His messages were sincere, apologetic, full of explanations and pleas for her to talk to him, but Raina wasn't ready. The wound was still too fresh, the betrayal too raw. Around noon, her phone rang, an unfamiliar number. Thinking it might be a potential employer, she had sent out several resumes the night before just in case. She answered, "Hello? Is this Raina Cole?" A woman's voice, crisp and professional. "Yes, this is she. My name is Patricia Lawrence. I'm the assistant to David Marrow, CEO of Marrow Enterprises. Mr. Marrow would like to meet with you this afternoon, if you're available." Raina's stomach dropped. David Marrow, Julian's brother. The one Julian had described as ruthless, cut from the same cloth as their father. "May I ask what this is regarding?" she managed to say, though she had a sinking feeling she already knew. There was a slight pause. "Mr. Marrow prefers to discuss the matter in person. A car can pick you up at 2 o'clock if that's convenient." Every instinct told Raina to refuse, but curiosity, and a stubborn part of her that refused to be intimidated, won out. "2 o'clock is fine. I'm at 1824 Maple Street, apartment 3B. "Excellent, the car will be there at 2. The woman hung up without further pleasantries. Raina spent the next hour getting ready, choosing her most professional outfit, a simple navy dress and blazer she wore for job interviews. Whatever David Marrow wanted, she was determined to face him with dignity. At precisely 2 o'clock, a sleek black car pulled up outside her building. The driver, a stoic man in a dark suit, opened the door for her and drove in silence to a towering glass building in Midtown, Marrow Enterprises headquarters. Patricia Lawrence, a thin woman with sharp features and sharper eyes, met her in the lobby. Mr. Marrow is expecting you. Follow me, please." They rode the elevator to the top floor, where Patricia led her down a hallway lined with expensive artwork to a massive corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows. Behind an imposing desk sat David Marrow. The family resemblance to Julian was clear. The same dark hair, the same blue eyes. But where Julian's features were softened by warmth and humor, David's were harder, colder. This was a man accustomed to getting his way. "Miss Cole," he said, rising from his chair with a practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Thank you for coming on such short notice. Please have a seat." Raina sat in one of the leather chairs facing his desk, her back straight, her expression carefully neutral. "Your assistant said you wanted to speak with me." David resumed his seat, studying her with calculating eyes. "Yes, I'll get right to the point. It's come to my attention that you've developed a relationship with my brother." Raina didn't confirm or deny. She simply waited, watching him. David's smile tightened. "My brother has always had a soft heart. It's both his greatest strength and his greatest weakness. He sees the good in people, gives them the benefit of the doubt. It's an admirable quality, but not always a practical one in our world." "Is there a question somewhere in this assessment of your brother's character?" Raina asked, surprising herself with her boldness. David raised an eyebrow, clearly not accustomed to being interrupted. "Very direct. I appreciate that." He leaned forward, clasping his hands on the desk. "Here's my question, Miss Cole. What are your intentions regarding Julian?" "My intentions?" Raina repeated, incredulous. "I think that's between Julian and me. Under normal circumstances, I would agree. But these aren't normal circumstances." David reached into a drawer and pulled out a folder, which he opened and glanced at before continuing. Raina Cole, 25 years old, no family, aged out of the foster system at 18. A series of temporary jobs before landing at the Marrow estate 6 months ago. He looked up at her. "Am I missing anything?" Raina felt her cheeks burn, both with anger and humiliation. "You had me investigated." David shrugged, unapologetic. "It's standard procedure when someone takes an interest in a member of our family, especially when that someone has access to one of our properties. I'm not a security threat, Mr. Marrow. I'm a maid who happens to know your brother. Knows him biblically, according to my sources." David's voice was cool, matter-of-fact. Raina stood abruptly, her hands shaking with anger. "This conversation is over. I don't have to sit here and be insulted." David remained seated, unperturbed by her reaction. "Please, Miss Cole, I'm not trying to insult you. I'm simply trying to understand the situation." He gestured to the chair. "Won't you sit back down? I have a proposition for you." Against her better judgment, Raina slowly sank back into the chair. "What kind of proposition?" David closed the folder and pushed it aside. "A business proposition, one that could be very beneficial for you." He named a sum of money that made Raina's eyes widen despite herself. "That amount, transferred to an account of your choosing, in exchange for your resignation from the Marrow estate and your agreement to end all contact with Julian." Raina stared at him, momentarily speechless. Then, as the full implication of his offer sank in, a cold anger settled in her chest. "You want to pay me off?" "I want to save everyone a lot of unnecessary pain," David corrected. "Julian is engaged to Sophia Huntington. It's an alliance our family has been building for years. Their wedding will merge two of New York's oldest fortunes, securing the future of both families for generations. Julian told me he ended that engagement." David's smile was patronizing. "My brother may believe that, but it's not his decision to make. The arrangements have been in place since they were children. Contracts have been signed, announcements made. It's happening, Miss Cole, with or without Julian's cooperation." "Then why are you so concerned about me?" Raina challenged. "If everything is already decided, what difference does it make who Julian spends his time with?" "Because he's been talking about breaking his contract, walking away from his responsibilities." David's pleasant facade finally cracked, revealing genuine frustration. "And it started right around the time he met you." The news should have made Raina happy. Julian was serious about her, serious enough to consider defying his family. But instead, she felt a heavy weight settling on her shoulders. She thought of Julian's trust fund, his position, his place in society, all the things he would lose if he chose her. "I'm not asking Julian to give up anything for me," she said quietly. "Maybe not deliberately, but your very existence in his life is a temptation, a fantasy of a simpler life, free from family obligations." David leaned forward, his voice softening to something almost kind. "My brother is idealistic." He doesn't understand that our position comes with responsibilities, duties that can't be abandoned on a whim or for a passing infatuation. You don't know anything about how Julian feels about me, Raina said, though a seed of doubt had been planted. Was that all she was to Julian? A fantasy? An escape? David reached into another drawer and pulled out a small box. Do you know what this is? He opened it, revealing a stunning diamond ring. This has been in our family for 5 generations. Every Marrow bride has worn it. It's currently intended for Sophia. Raina stared at the ring, its diamonds catching the light. It was beautiful, valuable, historic, and completely foreign to her world. Julian will never give you this ring, Miss Cole. Not because he doesn't care for you, but because he can't. Some traditions are too important to break. Some obligations can't be ignored, no matter how much we might wish they could be. David closed the box with a decisive snap. My offer stands. A fresh start for you, and the chance for Julian to fulfill his family duties without the pain of a prolonged goodbye. Think about it. He handed her a business card with a number scrawled on the back. Call me when you've made your decision. The car will take you home. Raina took the card automatically, her mind reeling. Without another word, she stood and left the office, Patricia Lawrence materializing to escort her back to the waiting car. The drive back to her apartment passed in a blur. Raina clutched David's card, turning it over and over in her fingers. The amount he had offered was life-changing, enough to go back to school, to buy a decent apartment, to never worry about job security again. But accepting it would mean losing Julian, admitting that David was right, that they came from different worlds, worlds that could never truly merge. As the car pulled up to her building, she made a decision. She took out her phone and sent Julian a text. We need to talk. Can you meet me tonight? His response was immediate. Yes. Where? Raina thought for a moment, then replied, the library, 8 p.m. It was time to face reality. The Marrow estate was quiet when Raina arrived that evening. She had used her staff key to enter through the service entrance, knowing the main staff would have left for the day. Only the night security guard was on duty, and he knew her well enough not to question her presence. The library was dark except for the glow of the fireplace and a single lamp on the desk. Julian was already there, pacing nervously. When he saw her, relief washed over his face. Raina, he moved toward her, then stopped, unsure of his welcome. Thank you for coming. For agreeing to talk. She remained near the door, maintaining distance between them. I met your brother today. Julian's expression darkened. David? What did he want? To offer me money to stay away from you. The words came out more bluntly than she had intended, but there was no gentle way to say it. Julian's face flushed with anger. He had no right. That's... God, I'm so sorry, Raina. He ran a hand through his hair, agitated. What did you tell him? I didn't give him an answer yet. Raina moved to one of the chairs by the fireplace and sat down, suddenly tired. But he made some points I can't ignore, Julian. Julian joined her by the fire, sitting in the chair opposite. Whatever he said, it was manipulation. David is an expert at that. He showed me a ring, Raina said quietly. A family heirloom, meant for Sophia. He said there are contracts, arrangements that have been in place for years. Julian cursed under his breath. The Marrow-Huntington merger. My father's obsession for the past decade. He leaned forward, his eyes intense. Raina, I told you, I ended things with Sophia weeks ago, before anything happened between us. But did you really end it? Or did you just walk away temporarily? Raina met his gaze steadily. Can you actually break an engagement that's been planned for years? That involves contracts and mergers and family expectations? Julian's silence was answer enough. That's what I thought, Raina said softly. Your brother was right about one thing. I'm a fantasy for you, Julian. An escape from your real life, your real responsibilities. No. Julian's voice was fierce as he knelt before her, taking her hands in his. You're not a fantasy, Raina. You're the most real thing in my life. The only real thing sometimes. The sincerity in his eyes made her heart ache. But I'm not part of your world, Julian. I never will be. Then I'll leave that world behind. He squeezed her hands. I don't need the Marrow fortune or the family name or any of it. I have my own investments, my own money. Not as much as my trust fund, but enough. More than enough. The offer stunned her. You would give up everything? For me? We've only known each other a few weeks, Julian. And I've felt more alive in these weeks than in all the years before. He brought her hands to his lips, kissing them gently. I love you, Raina. I think I've loved you since that first day, when I saw you stepping out of that bathroom, looking so surprised and beautiful. The words she had longed to hear yet now they filled her with a complicated mix of joy and fear. "Julian, you can't make that kind of decision so quickly. You need to think about what you'd be giving up." "I've been thinking about it every day since I met you." His eyes never left hers. "The money, the name, the social position, none of it has ever made me happy. But you do. Just talking with you, being near you. It's like finding a piece of myself I didn't know was missing." Raina felt tears welling in her eyes. "And what happens when the novelty wears off? When you realize that my world is full of bus rides and budget apartments and worrying about bills? Then we'll ride the bus together and make our apartment a home and figure out the bills as they come." Julian smiled, reaching up to wipe a tear from her cheek. "I'm not saying it will be easy, but nothing worth having ever is." He stood, pulling her gently to her feet. "Come with me, there's something I want to show you." Curious despite her reservations, Raina allowed him to lead her out of the library and up the grand staircase to the 3rd floor, the family wing where she had never been allowed to clean. Julian brought her to a door at the end of the hallway and opened it, revealing a beautiful bedroom suite decorated in shades of blue and cream. "This was my room growing up," he explained, leading her inside. "The only place in this house that ever felt like it was truly mine." The room was elegant, but surprisingly personal. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with worn paperbacks and hardcovers. A desk sat near the window, covered with notebooks and pens. Photos were scattered around, Julian as a child, as a teenager, with people Raina didn't recognize. "It's lovely," she said, running her fingers along the spines of his books. "I can see you in this room." Julian moved to the desk and opened a drawer, removing a small notebook. "I want you to read something. I wrote this the night after we first met, after the bathroom incident." He handed her the notebook, open to a page filled with his neat handwriting. Raina read the words slowly, her heart beating faster with each line. "I saw her today, really saw her. Not just another member of the staff, but a person with a soul so luminous it seemed to fill the room. She stood there caught in a moment of vulnerability, and all I could think was, she belongs here, not as someone who serves, but as someone who brings life to these empty rooms. I don't know her name yet. I don't know anything about her, but I want to. For the first time in years, I want to know someone beyond the surface. I want to hear her thoughts, her dreams, her fears. I want to know what makes her smile, what brings tears to her eyes. Is this madness, to feel such an immediate connection to a stranger? Or is it recognition, one lonely soul recognizing another? Tomorrow I'll learn her name, and then perhaps I'll begin to learn everything else." Raina closed the notebook, her hands trembling slightly. "You wrote this after our first meeting?" Julian nodded, taking the notebook and setting it aside. "I've never believed in love at first sight. It always seemed like a fantasy, a convenient literary device. But when I saw you that day," he shook his head as if still surprised by his own feelings, "something shifted inside me, like the world suddenly came into focus after years of blurred vision." He took her hands again, his expression earnest. "I'm not asking you to make any decisions tonight, Raina. I know this is complicated and you have every reason to be cautious, but I want you to know that what I feel for you is real. Not a fantasy, not an escape, real." Raina looked into his eyes, seeing the truth there. Whatever else was happening, whatever obstacles stood in their way, Julian's feelings for her were genuine, and hers for him were equally real and equally terrifying. "I need time," she said softly. "This is all happening so fast. Your brother, Sophia, now this." She gestured to the notebook. "I need to be sure, Julian, not just of your feelings, but of mine, of whether this is something that can actually work in the real world." Julian nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Take all the time you need. I'll be here when you're ready." He touched her cheek gently. "Just promise me one thing." "What?" "Don't make any decisions based on what David said or what you think is best for me. Make them based on what you want, what feels right for you." The request was so simple yet so profound. No one in Raina's life had ever put her wants, her needs first. She had always been the one to adapt, to accommodate, to make do with whatever was offered. The idea that her desires should be the priority was almost revolutionary. "I'll try," she promised. Julian smiled, leaning in to place a gentle kiss on her forehead. "That's all I ask." The next morning, Raina returned to work, determined to maintain a professional distance from Julian while she sorted through her feelings. Mrs. Porter welcomed her back with a knowing look, but asked no questions. For the next few days, Raina focused on her duties in the West Wing, while Julian respected her request for space. He didn't seek her out, though she occasionally caught glimpses of him in the hallways or heard his voice from nearby rooms. Each time, her heart would skip a beat, a reminder that whatever she told herself, her feelings for him were far from resolved. On Friday afternoon, as Raina was polishing the silver in the West Wing dining room, Mrs. Porter appeared with an unusual request. "The main dining room needs to be prepared for a dinner party tomorrow night," the housekeeper said. "Mr. Julian has invited some important guests, and I need my best staff on it." Raina hesitated. "I thought I was restricted to the West Wing." Mrs. Porter's expression softened slightly. "That was when I thought you needed protection from Mr. Julian, but it seems to me you're both being quite sensible at the moment. Besides, this is a staff all-hands situation. The entire Marrow family will be attending, plus the Huntingtons." The Huntingtons, including Sophia. A cold knot formed in Raina's stomach. "All of them?" Mrs. Porter nodded, her eyes sympathetic. "Mr. Julian's father is flying in from Europe. Mr. David and his wife will be there. And yes, the Huntingtons." She sighed. "I won't force you, Raina. If you'd prefer to stick to the West Wing, I can assign someone else." Pride made Raina straighten her shoulders. "No, I'll do it. It's my job." "Very well. Be in the main dining room at 9 tomorrow morning. We'll have a full day of preparation ahead of us." As Mrs. Porter left, Raina tried to ignore the sinking feeling in her chest. A dinner party with the entire Marrow and Huntington families. If there was ever a more pointed reminder of the world Julian belonged to, the world she could never be part of, she couldn't imagine it. That evening, as she was gathering her things to leave, she found a note in her locker. Julian's handwriting. "I didn't arrange this dinner. My father did from abroad. I only found out about it this morning. I'm sorry. If it's too difficult for you to be there, I understand. J." The note only confirmed what Raina had suspected. The dinner was part of the Marrow-Huntington alliance, another step in the long-planned merger of the families, and Julian was expected to play his part, whether he wanted to or not. She tucked the note into her pocket and left, her mind made up. She would work the dinner party, do her job professionally, and see with her own eyes the world Julian came from. Then perhaps she would finally be able to make a decision about their future, or lack thereof. Saturday passed in a flurry of activity. The main dining room was transformed with fresh flowers, fine china and polished silver. The chef and his team prepared a multi-course meal designed to impress. The staff was briefed on the evening's protocol, who would be seated where, which wines to serve with each course, how to address the various guests. Raina worked alongside the other staff, focusing on the tasks at hand rather than the significance of the evening. It was easier that way to lose herself in the familiar routines of service. By 7 o'clock, everything was ready. The staff changed into their formal serving uniforms, black dresses for the women, suits for the men. Raina was assigned to help with the table service, which meant she would be in the dining room throughout the meal, seeing and hearing everything. The guests began to arrive at 7:30. Raina watched from the service entrance as the Marrow family assembled in the foyer. Julian's father, Robert Marrow, was an imposing figure, tall and broad-shouldered, with silver hair and the same blue eyes as his sons. David arrived with his wife, a slender woman with a practiced smile. And then Julian, looking uncomfortable in a tailored suit, his hair neatly combed for once. The Huntingtons arrived last, Edward and Eleanor Huntington, both elegant and polished, with their daughter Sophia between them. Sophia was wearing a designer dress that probably cost more than Raina made in a year, her blonde hair styled in an elaborate updo, diamonds glittering at her throat and ears. As the families greeted each other, Raina noticed Julian's stiff posture, the way he barely acknowledged Sophia's air kiss to his cheek. His eyes kept darting to the service entrance, as if searching for someone. For her, Raina realized. Their eyes met briefly across the foyer, and Raina saw a flash of pain in Julian's expression before he quickly looked away. He hadn't expected her to be here, she realized. He had hoped she would stay away, sparing them both this awkward situation. But Raina needed to see this, needed to witness Julian in his natural habitat, surrounded by the people who shared his privileged world. The dinner began with cocktails in the drawing room, where Raina and the other servers circulated with trays of canapes and drinks. She kept her eyes lowered, focusing on her job, but couldn't help overhearing snippets of conversation. "Julian, darling, you're looking thin," Eleanor Huntington said. "Has the chef here been neglecting you?" "I'm fine, Mrs. Huntington," Julian replied politely. "Just busy with some new investment projects." "Speaking of investments," Edward Huntington boomed, This merger is going to revolutionize both our companies. The Marrow-Huntington alliance will be unstoppable. Robert Marrow raised his glass. To family alliances, in business and in life. Everyone drank to the toast, except Julian, who merely raised his glass without drinking. His father noticed, a frown creasing his brow. "Julian, a word in private?" Robert gestured toward the study. With a resigned expression, Julian followed his father out of the drawing room. Raina continued her duties, but her mind was with Julian, wondering what was being said in that private conversation. Dinner was announced 20 minutes later. Julian and his father returned to the drawing room, both with tight expressions. Something had happened between them, something tense. In the dining room, Raina was stationed near the sideboard, responsible for serving the wine and clearing plates between courses. The conversation around the table was dominated by business talk, the details of the merger, the benefits to both families, the future of Marrow-Huntington Enterprises. Julian remained mostly silent, responding only when directly addressed. His eyes occasionally found Raina's across the room, conveying apologies she couldn't acknowledge. During the main course, Robert Marrow tapped his glass, calling for attention. "I'd like to make an announcement," he said, his voice carrying easily in the large room. "As you all know, our families have been working toward this merger for many years. Tonight, I'm pleased to share that the final contracts have been signed. The Marrow-Huntington alliance is official." Applause broke out around the table. Julian's face remained expressionless. "And to cement this alliance," Robert continued, looking directly at his younger son, "I think it's time we set a date for the wedding. Julian, Sophia, what do you say to next spring? The Riverside Church, followed by a reception at the plaza. Eleanor and I have already discussed the preliminary arrangements." A heavy silence fell over the table. All eyes turned to Julian, who sat frozen in his chair, his knuckles white around his wineglass. "Father," he finally said, his voice quiet but firm, "I told you in the study, and I'm telling you now in front of everyone, there will be no wedding." Gasps and murmurs broke out around the table. Sophia's face flushed with humiliation, while her parents looked horrified. "Julian," Robert Marrow's voice was sharp with anger, "this is neither the time nor the place for your rebellious phase. The merger is signed. The wedding will proceed as planned." Julian set down his glass carefully. "The merger can proceed without a wedding. My shares in the company are committed to the deal as agreed, but my personal life is not part of the transaction." David Marrow leaned forward, his expression conciliatory. "Julian, be reasonable. This union has been planned for years. The social and business benefits are immeasurable." "Then you marry Sophia," Julian retorted, a rare flash of anger breaking through his composed exterior. "I'm sure she'd be just as happy with a different Marrow, as long as the bank accounts are comparable." Sophia stood abruptly, tears in her eyes. "How dare you? After everything, after all these years—" "We were never in love, Sophia," Julian said, his voice gentler now. "You know that as well as I do. We've been pushed together since we were children, told we were perfect for each other. But have we ever, even once, actually chosen each other?" The question hung in the air, unanswerable. Sophia sat back down, her face a mask of hurt and anger. Robert Marrow's voice cut through the tense silence. "This discussion is over. Julian, you will fulfill your obligations to this family, or you will face the consequences." "What consequences, Father?" Julian asked, standing now. "Cutting me off? Removing me from the board? Go ahead. I have my own money, my own investments. I don't need the Marrow fortune." "You ungrateful," Robert began, but Julian interrupted. "I'm not ungrateful. I'm just finally being honest about what I want." Julian's eyes found Raina's across the room, and for a moment everyone else seemed to disappear. "And it's not this. It's not pretending to love someone for the sake of a business deal or family expectations." Raina felt a blush creep up her neck as several heads turned to follow Julian's gaze. Sophia was the first to understand, her eyes widening as she took in the silent exchange between Julian and the maid. "Her?" Sophia's voice dripped with disbelief. "You're throwing away everything for a maid?" Julian's jaw tightened. "Her name is Raina, and yes, I would give up everything for her, because she sees me, really sees me. Not the Marrow heir, not a business asset, just me." The room erupted in chaos. Robert Marrow was shouting. David was trying to calm the Huntingtons. Sophia was crying. In the midst of it all, Julian walked calmly across the room to where Raina stood, frozen in shock. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, taking her hands. "I didn't want it to happen like this, but I'm not sorry for what I said. Every word was true." Raina stared up at him, overwhelmed. "Julian, you just... in front of everyone?" "I know," he smiled ruefully. "Dramatic, wasn't it? But I'm tired of pretending, Raina. Tired of living someone else's idea of my life." He squeezed her hands. "I love you. And if you'll have me, I want to build a life with you, a real life based on what we choose, not what others expect." Before Raina could respond, Robert Marrow's voice cut through the room like a whip. "Julian, step away from that woman immediately." Julian didn't even turn around. "No, Father, I'm done taking orders from you." "If you leave this room with her, you are no longer my son," Robert threatened. "You will be cut off, disinherited." "Is that what you want?" Julian finally turned to face his father. "What I want is to be happy, something you've never understood." He looked around the table at the shocked faces of both families. "I'm sorry for the disruption. Enjoy your dinner." With that, he gently tugged Raina's hand, leading her toward the service entrance. She followed in a daze, unable to process what had just happened. In the hallway outside the dining room, Julian finally stopped, turning to her with an anxious expression. "I know that was a lot, probably too much, but I meant every word, Raina." Raina looked up at him, her mind racing. "Julian, you just gave up everything. Your family, your inheritance." "Not everything," he said softly. "Not if you're still here." The simple statement hit her like a physical force. Julian Marrow, heir to one of New York's greatest fortunes, had just publicly chosen her over everything he had ever known. Not as a fantasy, not as an escape, but as the reality he wanted. "I love you," she whispered, the words finally finding their way from her heart to her lips. "I love you, but I'm scared. What happens tomorrow when you realize what you've given up? When you have to live in my world instead of yours?" Julian touched her face gently. "My world was never about the money or the name, Raina. It was about finding a place where I belonged, and I've never belonged anywhere the way I belong with you." Tears filled her eyes. "You really mean it, don't you?" "With all my heart," he smiled, wiping away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. "So what do you say? Are you willing to take a chance on us?" Before Raina could answer, the service door burst open and Mrs. Porter appeared, her expression frantic. "Mr. Julian, Miss Cole, you need to leave now. Your father is calling security to have Raina removed from the premises." Julian's face hardened. "He wouldn't dare." "He would, and he is," Mrs. Porter insisted. "Please, there's no time. Go out through the kitchen. Luis has his car waiting at the service entrance." Raina looked at the housekeeper in surprise. "You're helping us?" A hint of a smile touched Mrs. Porter's stern face. "I've worked for the Marrows for 30 years, and I've never seen any of them stand up for love over duty. It's about time someone did." She pressed a set of keys into Raina's hand. "These are for my sister's beach cottage in Rhode Island. It's empty this time of year. Go there, lie low for a while until things calm down." Julian grasped the older woman's hand. "Thank you, Mrs. Porter. I won't forget this. Just be happy," she replied. "Now go, quickly." Hand in hand, Julian and Raina raced through the kitchen, ignoring the startled looks from the staff, and out to the service entrance where Luis, the gardener, was waiting in his old sedan. "Get in," he urged, opening the back door. "I heard what happened in there. Pretty brave, man." They climbed into the car, hearts racing as Luis pulled away from the Marrow estate. In the distance, they could see security guards emerging from the main entrance. Too late to stop them. "Where to?" Luis asked, glancing in the rearview mirror. Julian looked at Raina, squeezing her hand. "Rhode Island?" he suggested. "Just until we figure things out?" Raina nodded, still dazed by the rapid turn of events. Rhode Island. As Luis drove them through the night, away from the Marrow estate and toward an uncertain future, Raina leaned her head against Julian's shoulder. Despite everything, the chaos, the drama, the burning bridges, she felt a strange sense of peace. For the first time in her life, she had chosen something for herself, and someone had chosen her back. The beach cottage in Rhode Island was small but charming, a weathered, cedar-shingled structure with a wraparound porch and views of the Atlantic Ocean. In early autumn, the tourist season was over, leaving the beach nearly deserted and the small town quiet. Raina stood on the porch, wrapped in one of Julian's sweaters against the morning chill, watching the sun rise over the water. They had arrived late the previous night, exhausted from the drive and the emotional upheaval of the dinner party. Luis had dropped them off with promises to keep their location secret, then headed back to New York. The door opened behind her, and Julian emerged with 2 steaming mugs of coffee. His hair was rumpled from sleep, his expensive shirt wrinkled. Somehow he looked more handsome this way, less polished, more real. "Good morning," he said, handing her one of the mugs. Sleep okay? Raina nodded, accepting the coffee gratefully. Better than I expected, considering everything. Julian leaned against the porch railing beside her, looking out at the ocean. It's beautiful here. Peaceful. It is. Raina sipped her coffee, trying to process the whirlwind of the past 24 hours. Julian, what happens now? With your family? With the merger? Julian sighed, running a hand through his already tousled hair. The merger will probably go ahead. My shares are already committed to the deal. That much is legally binding. As for my family, he shrugged. My father wasn't bluffing about cutting me off, but I meant what I said. I have my own investments, my own money. Not Marrow fortune levels, but enough. And you're really okay with that? Giving up everything? Julian turned to face her, his expression serious. Raina, I haven't given up everything. I've given up things that were never making me happy in the first place. He set down his mug and took her free hand. The real question is, are you okay with this, with us? It happened so fast, and I know I put you in an impossible position. Raina looked down at their joined hands, his pale against her brown skin. Such a simple image, yet so profound in what it represented. When I was growing up in foster care, I used to dream about belonging somewhere, she said quietly. Having a real home, a real family. But after a while I stopped believing it was possible. I convinced myself that being invisible was safer, that not wanting too much meant not getting hurt. She looked up, meeting his eyes. And then you came along, with your books and your tea, and your way of looking at me like I mattered, like I belonged. She squeezed his hand. So yes, I'm okay with this. With us. I'm terrified, but I'm okay. Julian's smile was like sunrise. He leaned in, kissing her gently. We'll figure it out together. Day by day, they spent the next week in a peaceful bubble, exploring the small coastal town, cooking simple meals in the cottage's tiny kitchen, walking for hours along the empty beach. For the first time in her life, Raina didn't have to work. She could just be, reading books from the cottage's small library, helping Julian figure out how to use the ancient washing machine, watching the tide come in and out. Julian was different here too, more relaxed, more himself. He told her stories about his childhood, about the pressure he'd always felt to be the kind of Marrow his father wanted. He showed her his writing, journals and short stories he'd been working on for years, but had never shared with anyone. I always wanted to be a writer, he admitted one evening as they sat by the fireplace, but my father said it was a hobby, not a career, not for a Marrow. You're good, Raina said, having read several of his stories. Really good. You should pursue it. Julian looked at her with wonder. You really think so? I know so. She smiled, leaning against his shoulder. Julian Marrow, writer. It suits you. On their 8th day at the cottage, reality intruded. Julian's phone, which had been unusually quiet, rang with a call from David. I should take this, Julian said, his expression turning serious. It might be important. Raina nodded, giving him privacy by stepping outside onto the porch. Through the window she could see Julian pacing as he talked, his free hand gesturing occasionally. The conversation lasted nearly 20 minutes before he joined her outside, his face troubled. What is it? She asked. What's wrong? Julian leaned against the porch railing, looking out at the ocean. That was David. Apparently there's been some fallout from our departure. The Huntingtons are threatening to pull out of the merger unless I'm completely removed from the company. All shares, all positions, everything. Raina felt a cold knot form in her stomach. Because of me? No, Julian said firmly. Because I refused to go along with an arranged marriage like it's the 1800s. This isn't your fault, Raina. What will happen if they pull out? Julian sighed. The merger falls apart. Marrow Enterprises loses a major opportunity for expansion. My father loses face in the business world. He shrugged. Basically, a huge corporate drama, but nothing that will destroy the company. And your shares? Your position? That's why David called. He's trying to broker a compromise. He thinks he can convince our father to let me keep my shares and my seat on the board if I agree to publicly apologize to the Huntingtons for the embarrassing scene at dinner. Raina felt sick. You mean apologize for choosing me? Julian turned to her, taking her hands. Which I won't do. Ever. His eyes were fierce with determination. David can find another solution. I won't apologize for following my heart. But Julian, your shares, your position in the company, that's your legacy, your birthright. No, Raina, my birthright is the freedom to live my own life, make my own choices. He squeezed her hands. The money, the position, they were just golden handcuffs. I don't need them. Raina wanted to believe him, but doubt gnawed at her. What if months or years from now he resented her for what he'd given up? What if the romance of their escape faded, leaving only the reality of what he'd lost? What did you tell David? She asked. That I needed time to think about it, that I'd call him back. Raina nodded, trying to hide her worry. You should consider what he's offering, Julian. It's a compromise that would let you keep part of your family connection. Julian studied her face, his expression softening. You're worried I'll regret choosing you over them. She couldn't deny it. It's a lot to give up, Julian. Raina, he cupped her face gently. I would give up 1,000 Marrow enterprises to be with you, but if it will ease your mind, I'll consider David's offer. That night, as Julian slept beside her, Raina lay awake, thinking. The past week had been magical, a fantasy of love and simplicity, but real life was more complicated. Julian came from wealth and privilege, a world of connections and opportunities she could never provide. She loved him too much to be the reason he lost all of that. An idea began to form in her mind, a way to give Julian back his world without losing him completely. It would hurt. God, it would hurt. But if it was the right thing for him in the long run. The next morning, while Julian was in the shower, Raina made a call of her own, to David Marrow. Miss Cole, he answered, his voice cool but not hostile. This is a surprise. I want to make a deal, Raina said without preamble. One that gives Julian back his position and his shares, without requiring him to apologize for our relationship. There was a pause. I'm listening. Raina took a deep breath. I'll step back. Let Julian return to New York, to his family, to his place in the company. No public relationship between us, nothing to embarrass the Marrow name or complicate the merger. And in return, Julian keeps everything, his shares, his board seat, his trust fund. And you never tell him about this conversation. You make him believe the compromise was your idea. David was silent for a long moment. Why would you do this? You obviously care for my brother. Because I love him, Raina said simply. Enough to want what's best for him in the long run. And that's having his family, his legacy intact. And what about you? What do you get out of this arrangement? Raina hadn't expected the question. I get to know he'll be okay. That's enough. Another long pause. You're not what I expected, Miss Cole. I rarely am. Very well, David finally said. I accept your terms, but I have one condition of my own. What is it? You tell Julian the truth, eventually. Not about this call, but about why you're stepping back. He deserves that much. Raina closed her eyes, fighting back tears. I will, when the time is right. After hanging up, Raina sat on the porch steps, gathering her courage. What she was about to do would break her heart, but she believed it was the right thing for Julian in the long run. He deserved his family, his position, his world, all the things he'd been born to, things she could never give him. When Julian emerged from the cottage, freshly showered and smiling, Raina felt her resolve waver. How could she walk away from the man she loved? But then she thought of his future, of the regrets he might eventually harbor, and she strengthened her determination. Julian, she began, her voice steadier than she felt. We need to talk. His smile faded as he took in her serious expression. What's wrong? This past week has been magical, she said, choosing her words carefully. Being here with you, away from everything, it's been like a dream. But dreams end, Julian. Reality always returns. Julian sat beside her on the steps, concern in his eyes. What are you saying, Raina? She looked out at the ocean, unable to meet his gaze. I'm saying that this, us, it can't last. We come from different worlds, Julian. Worlds that can't really merge no matter how much we might want them to. Raina, we've talked about this. I don't care about those differences. I love you. I know you do. And I love you too. She finally turned to face him, fighting to keep her voice steady. But love isn't always enough, not when it means giving up everything else that matters. Julian's expression hardened. This is about the call from David, isn't it? About the company, the shares. It's about your life, Julian, your family, your legacy, things you've spent your entire life building. She took his hand, memorizing the feel of it in hers. I can't be the reason you lose all of that. I won't be. That's my choice to make, not yours, Julian argued, his voice rising with frustration. No, it's mine too, because I'm the one who would have to live with knowing what you gave up for me. Raina stood, needing physical distance to maintain her resolve. I'm going back to New York today. You should call David, work out a compromise that lets you keep your position in the company. Julian stood too, his eyes desperate. Raina, please, don't do this. We can figure it out together. The pain in his voice nearly broke her. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to let them go, she said softly, to let them have the life they were meant to have, even if it doesn't include you. That's not your decision to make for me. Julian's voice cracked with emotion. I chose you, Raina. I choose you now. Don't I get a say in my own life? Raina felt tears spilling down her cheeks. You'll thank me one day, Julian. When you're back in your world, with all the opportunities and connections that come with being a Marrow, you'll see that this was for the best. No. Julian shook his head, his own eyes bright with unshed tears. I won't, because it's not true. He reached for her, but Raina stepped back. If he touched her now, she would crumble. Her resolve would vanish. I called a taxi, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. It's taking me to the train station. I've already packed my things. Julian stared at her, disbelief and pain etched across his features. Just like that, after everything we've shared. Not just like that. This is the hardest thing I've ever done. Raina wiped at her tears. But it's the right thing, Julian, for both of us. You don't believe that, he said, his voice low and intense. I can see it in your eyes, Raina. You don't believe this is right any more than I do. A car horn sounded from the driveway, the taxi right on time. Raina picked up her small bag from the porch floor. Goodbye, Julian, she said, unable to meet his eyes one last time. Be happy. That's all I want for you. Before he could respond, before her courage could fail her completely, Raina walked down the steps and toward the waiting taxi. Each step felt like moving through molasses, her body fighting against leaving the man she loved. But she kept going, kept moving forward. Behind her, she heard Julian call her name, his voice breaking. She didn't turn around, couldn't. If she saw his face now, she would never leave. As the taxi pulled away, taking her back toward her old life, the life without Julian, Raina finally allowed herself to break down completely. Sobs racked her body as she watched the cottage grow smaller in the distance, until it disappeared from view entirely. She had done the right thing. She had to believe that, even if it felt like she had just torn out her own heart and left it behind. On the porch of a small beach cottage in Rhode Island, 3 months passed. Winter settled over New York City, turning the skies gray and the streets slushy with half-melted snow. Raina had found a new job at a small boutique hotel in Manhattan, where the work was harder, but the pay was better. She had moved to a slightly nicer apartment, still in Queens, but with reliable heat and fewer cockroaches. On the surface, her life had improved, but inside she felt hollow, empty. The pain of leaving Julian hadn't diminished with time as she'd hoped. If anything, it had burrowed deeper, becoming a constant ache that she carried with her every day. She hadn't heard from him directly, though she occasionally saw his name in the business section of newspapers or on financial news websites. As she had hoped, Julian had retained his position at Marrow Enterprises. The merger with Huntington Corp had proceeded as planned. Everything had returned to normal, for him at least. Sometimes, in her weaker moments, Raina would allow herself to imagine what might have happened if she'd stayed. If she'd been selfish enough to let Julian give up everything for her, would they still be in that beach cottage? Or somewhere else, building a life together? But then, reality would reassert itself. Julian belonged in his world of wealth and privilege. He had responsibilities, connections, a legacy to uphold. She had done the right thing by walking away. She had to believe that. On a cold December morning, Raina was in the hotel laundry room, organizing linens, when her supervisor appeared. Raina, there's someone asking for you at the front desk, she said, looking puzzled. Says it's important. Raina frowned. No one knew she worked here, except her former landlord and Mrs. Porter, whom she still occasionally texted with. Did they give a name? A Mrs. Porter, actually, says she used to work with you. Curious and a little concerned, Raina made her way to the front desk. Mrs. Porter was standing there, looking somewhat out of place in the modern hotel lobby with her sensible coat and sturdy shoes. Mrs. Porter, Raina greeted her, genuinely pleased to see the older woman. This is a surprise. The housekeeper smiled, though her eyes were serious. Hello, Raina. You're looking well. This place suits you. Thank you. Is everything okay? Is something wrong at the estate? Mrs. Porter glanced around the busy lobby. Is there somewhere we could talk privately? What I have to say isn't for public consumption. Increasingly concerned, Raina led her to a small staff break room that was empty at this hour. What's going on? Is Julian okay? Mrs. Porter studied her face. You still care for him. It wasn't a question, but Raina answered anyway. I never stopped. The housekeeper nodded, as if confirming something to herself. He never stopped caring for you either, Raina. That's partly why I'm here. She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded newspaper. Have you seen this? It's from this morning's financial section. Raina took the paper, unfolding it to reveal a headline. Marrow heir resigns from family business, launches independent publishing house. Her heart skipped a beat as she quickly scanned the article. Julian had resigned from Marrow Enterprises, selling his shares back to the company. He had used the proceeds to start a small publishing company focused on emerging voices in fiction and poetry. I don't understand, Raina said, looking up at Mrs. Porter. He had everything back, his position, his shares. Why would he walk away now? Because it wasn't what he wanted. Mrs. Porter's voice was gentle. It never was, Raina. You knew that, deep down. Julian was never meant for the corporate world, for his father's idea of success. He was meant for books, for stories, for a different kind of life. Raina felt dizzy, the implications of the article sinking in. Does he know you're here? Did he send you? Mrs. Porter shook her head. No, he has no idea. But I've watched that boy struggle for months, trying to fit back into a world that never really suited him. And I've seen the way he still looks at that guest bathroom, the way he still sits in the library at night, staring at the chair where you used to sit. Tears filled Raina's eyes. I thought I was doing the right thing, giving him back his world, his family. Oh, child. Mrs. Porter touched her arm gently. You gave him back his cage, not his world. His family, yes, but at the cost of his freedom, his happiness. The words hit Raina like a physical blow. Had she been wrong all this time? Had her sacrifice actually hurt Julian rather than helped him? What should I do? She whispered. Mrs. Porter pressed the newspaper into her hands. That's for you to decide. But if you want my opinion, that boy has been waiting for you to come back since the day you left. He just didn't know how to find you. She reached into her purse again and pulled out a small piece of paper. This is the address of his new publishing house. It opened yesterday. He's there now, trying to build something that matters to him. She smiled softly. Something I think would matter to you too. Raina stared at the address, her heart racing. I can't just show up there. After all this time, after what I did, why not? He showed up at that bathroom door when you weren't expecting him. Sometimes the best things in life arrive unannounced. Mrs. Porter squeezed her hand. Take a chance, Raina. Life is too short for regrets. After Mrs. Porter left, Raina sat in the break room for a long time, staring at the newspaper article and the address. Could she really do this? Just show up at Julian's new business after months of silence, after walking away from him when he'd given up everything to be with her. But what if Mrs. Porter was right? What if Julian had been as miserable these past months as she had been? What if they had both been making sacrifices that neither of them wanted? Before she could talk herself out of it, Raina approached her supervisor. I need to take the rest of the day off. Family emergency. An hour later, she stood outside a brownstone in Brooklyn, looking up at a newly installed sign. Marrow Books, independent publishers. Through the large front window, she could see bookshelves being installed, boxes being unpacked, a small but beautiful space coming to life. Taking a deep breath, Raina pushed open the door. A bell jingled softly, announcing her arrival. The main room was empty, but she heard movement from a back office. Be right with you, called a familiar voice that made her heart stop. And then Julian was there, stepping into the main room with a stack of books in his arms. He froze when he saw her, the books nearly slipping from his grasp. Raina, he whispered, as if saying her name too loudly might make her disappear. She stood rooted to the spot, drinking in the sight of him. He looked different, his hair a little longer, his clothes more casual, but his eyes were the same, those blue eyes that had seen her when no one else did. Hi, she said, her voice barely audible. I saw the article about your new publishing house. Julian set the books down carefully on a nearby table, his movements slow, as if he was afraid any sudden motion might shatter the moment. Yeah, he said, it's been a long time coming. Finally got the courage to do what I've always wanted. Raina glanced around the space, warm, inviting, filled with books. It's beautiful, Julian. It suits you. A tense silence fell between them. 3 months of separation, creating a gulf that neither knew how to cross. Why did you leave? Julian finally asked, the question bursting from him as if he'd been holding it in since the day she walked away. The real reason, Raina. Not the one about different worlds or what was best for me. The truth. Raina swallowed hard. She had promised David she would tell Julian the truth eventually. Perhaps that time had come. I thought I was saving you, she admitted. Giving you back your family, your legacy, your world. I thought, her voice broke. I thought eventually you'd resent me for all you'd given up. That one day you'd look at me and see everything you'd lost, instead of what you'd gained. Julian took a step toward her, then another. And did it ever occur to you that none of those things mattered to me? That the only thing I ever wanted was you? Tears spilled down Raina's cheeks. I was scared, Julian, terrified. No one had ever chosen me before. No one had ever put me first. I didn't know how to believe it could last. Another step closer. And now? Do you believe it now? Raina looked around at the bookstore, at the life Julian was building for himself, not as a Marrow heir, but as his own man. You walked away from it all anyway, even after I left, because it wasn't my dream. It was never what I wanted. Julian was close enough now that she could see the emotion in his eyes, the vulnerability. You were right about one thing, Raina. I did belong in a different world, just not the one my father built. The one I'm building now, with books, with stories, with meaning. His voice softened. The only thing missing was you. He reached for her hand, slowly, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. When his fingers entwined with hers, it felt like coming home. I made a mistake, Raina whispered, walking away from you. I thought I was being selfless, but I was really just afraid of believing I deserved something as good as you. Julian's free hand came up to cup her cheek. And now? Raina leaned into his touch, the warmth of his palm against her skin melting the ice that had formed around her heart these past months. Now I think maybe we both deserve a chance at happiness. A real chance on our own terms. Julian's smile was like sunrise after the longest night. I've missed you so much, Raina. Every day, every hour. I kept looking for you in crowds, hoping I'd find you by chance. I'm here now, she said, stepping closer until she was in his arms. If you still want me. His answer was a kiss, gentle at first, then deepening with all the longing of their months apart. Raina felt herself melting into him, her body remembering the feel of his, her heart recognizing its match. When they finally broke apart, Julian rested his forehead against hers, a smile playing at his lips. You know, this reminds me of the first time we met. Raina raised an eyebrow. How so? You walking into a place unexpectedly. Me stunned, speechless at the sight of you. His eyes twinkled with humor and love. Though thankfully you're wearing more clothes this time. Raina laughed, the sound bubbling up from a place of pure joy. And what were you thinking just now when you saw me standing there? Julian's expression turned serious, his eyes filled with love as he echoed the words that had started their journey months ago. She looks like she belongs here more than anyone ever has. And this time Raina believed him, because she finally understood. Home wasn't a mansion or a beach cottage or a brownstone in Brooklyn. Home was wherever they were together, building a life on their own terms. I love you, Julian Marrow, she said, standing on tiptoe to kiss him again. Book publisher, former heir, the man who sees me. And I love you, Raina Cole, he replied, holding her close. The woman who taught me what really matters, who makes any space feel like home just by being in it. Outside, snow began to fall, dusting the streets of Brooklyn in white. But inside Marrow Books, warmth bloomed as two people who had once lived in different worlds created a new one together, a world built on choice, on courage, and on a love that had begun when she wasn't looking. The end.